One collision at sea, and the world came within seconds of nuclear war. It was the height of the Cold War. American warships prowling the Pacific Ocean, Soviet submarines were stalking them in silence. And then, in March 1984, steel giants clashed. A Soviet submarine slammed into a US aircraft carrier packed with nuclear weapons. The question is, how close did this accident bring us to World War III? March 21st, 1984. The Pacific Ocean was calm, a glassy expanse stretching endlessly. To most of the world, it was just another spring day. But out here, in the cold ocean, two superpowers were seconds away from disaster. Above the surface, the pride of the US Navy, the USS Kitty Hawk, a 1,000-foot aircraft carrier bristling with power. Beneath the waves, a Soviet hunter, the K-314 submarine, shadowing its every move. One mistake, one miscalculation, and the Cold War could have turned hot. The USS Kitty Hawk, CV-63, was no ordinary warship. Commissioned in 1961, she was the lead ship of her class, one of the largest aircraft carriers afloat. By the 1980s, she was the backbone of the US Navy's Pacific Fleet. Sailors often called her a floating city. Nearly 5,000 crew lived and worked on board. Her flight deck stretched longer than 3 football fields, launching squadrons of F-14 Tomcats, A-6 Intruders, and S-3 Vikings into the sky. In the Cold War chessboard, Kitty Hawk was more than a ship. She was a symbol. Where she sailed, America projected strength. On this March day, she was leading a carrier strike group across the Pacific. Destroyers and cruisers formed her shield. Nuclear submarines prowled nearby, unseen guardians below. But while the Americans believed they controlled these waters, someone else was watching. Beneath the waves, the Soviet Victor-class submarine K-314 stalked silently. Her mission: track the Kitty Hawk, record her movements, and remind the US Navy that the Soviet Union was always present. Inside the sub, conditions were harsh. The air was thick, tinged with diesel and sweat. Red lights glowed in the control room. Sonar operators hunched over headphones, listening to the ocean's whispers. Every pulse told them where the American carrier was. To shadow an enemy carrier was a dangerous game. One misstep could expose them. The Kitty Hawk's enormous engines churned the sea, leaving a wake of turbulence. The Soviet submarine rode those currents like a shadow clinging to its master. For hours, the game continued. Above, American sailors went about their routines, launching night patrols, monitoring radar screens, eating in mess halls. Below, Soviet submariners whispered, their nerves stretched tight as steel cables. As the war machines approached near, the tension only grew. American radar operators had suspicions. Blips flickered on screens, strange echoes in the deep. But in the vast Pacific, uncertainty was normal. Meanwhile, inside K-314, a decision was made. The submarine would surface to reposition. It was a routine maneuver. Rise to periscope depth, check surroundings, adjust course. But routine at sea is a fragile word. One small miscalculation in depth, in bearing, in timing, and routine turns to chaos. At 22:45 hours, K-314 began to rise. Her crew adjusted ballast tanks, guiding the submarine upward. Sonar operators strained, listening for propellers above. And then silence. No alarms, no warnings. Just the groan of steel as the submarine pushed upward toward fate. The Pacific night exploded in violence. A thunderous crash echoed through the waves as K-314 slammed into Kitty Hawk's starboard side. On the carrier, sailors were thrown from bunks. Cups, trays, and tools rattled across decks. The Kitty Hawk shuddered, her massive frame jolted by the impact. Men rushed to battle stations, not knowing if they were under attack. Below, chaos gripped the Soviet submarine. The bow crumpled, steel screeched, compartments flooded. Crewmen were hurled against bulkheads as water sprayed from ruptured pipes. One officer later recalled, "It felt like the end of the world." On the surface, lookouts spotted something shocking, a Soviet periscope and hull scraping against the carrier. In the confusion, many believed it was deliberate, the opening move of war. The Kitty Hawk's captain demanded reports. Damage control raced through the ship. Bulkheads held, compartments were sealed. The carrier was bruised but seaworthy. But the Soviet submarine was crippled. Her bow was mangled. Searchlights from the American fleet lit up the dark waves. And there it was, a Soviet submarine, gasping for air, wounded and exposed in the middle of a US carrier group. It was a surreal sight, enemies face to face, closer than anyone wanted. Instantly, US destroyers and cruisers moved in. Their guns swiveled, missiles armed, radars locked on target. Above, helicopters hovered, their rotors chopping the night air. On the deck of K-314, Soviet sailors emerged lit by American searchlights. They stood motionless, staring back at the overwhelming firepower around them. For hours, the standoff continued. Every second felt like an eternity. One flare, one panicked shot, one misunderstanding, and the Cold War would have ignited into World War III. But restraint held. The Americans didn't fire. The Soviets didn't panic. In the silence of that tense night, discipline on both sides prevented catastrophe. Eventually, the Kitty Hawk continued her mission, her hull scarred but her pride intact. The K-314 limped away, damaged and humiliated, returning to Soviet waters under escort. Official reports later minimized the event. The US Navy described it as an incident at sea. The Soviet Navy claimed little. But for those who lived it, the truth was unforgettable. Two giants had collided and the world had been seconds from nuclear war. Not from aggression, but from accident. The Kitty Hawk collision became one of many hidden moments of the Cold War. Near misses, close calls, accidents that could have changed history, and also the possibility of the World War III or the nuclear war could have started. Thanks to the US military, as it made the bold decision by let go off the whole scene and consider it as just a mistake, which saved the world. It revealed the dangers of constant shadowing, how superpowers, locked in rivalry, sometimes pushed too close, and it showed how fragile peace really was, not secured only by treaties and diplomacy, but by the discipline of sailors and submariners who, in the heat of chaos, chose not to fire. The Cold War was filled with missiles, spies, and strategy, but sometimes history balanced on something simpler: a ship, a submarine, a mistake. And the night of March 21st, 1984, steel against steel, remains a reminder of how close the world has come to chaos and destruction. The ocean remembers. The men who served that night never forgot. And history whispers that sometimes it's not great battles or grand decisions that change the fate of nations, but accidents hidden in the dark that almost end everything. Subscribe to the channel and hit like and share for more upcoming videos.